Welcome, everybody. We have another episode of Against the Grain podcast. I'm so excited to announce our guest. I want to make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. We have so many more amazing things planned for this channel. And like I said, there's just a lot of content. Check out our other YouTube videos as well, too. We have worship, sermons. We got the whole deal on there. So I know you guys will be blessed. With that being said, we have Luke Holter in the house. Luke, thank you so much for coming, for being here. It's such a blessing. You're such a blessing to me, our family, our church. And this is a long time coming. I know, you've taken a lot of trips. You even had a couple trips postponed because you were sick and stuff. Yeah. But thank you for coming. But for those that don't know, give yourself a little intro for those that are watching that maybe have never heard of you.
Okay.
Those that aren't ministry famous, because you're not ministry famous. I love that you say that. Go for it, though. Go for it.
So preacher's kid, which is why I have all these tattoos. But basically, just grew up in a Christian home. And when I never really knew Jesus. I kind of knew the branding of Christianity, the branding of Jesus. I loved Jesus because I was told to love Jesus. And that's what the church said, is to be a good boy, and be a good Christian. But I didn't really know Jesus at all. And so my senior year, my best friend died. And my high school sweetheart, who I had given my virginity to, I thought I was going to marry her, broke up with me the same weekend as my best friend's funeral. Mm-hmm. So it was just like this double whammy of depression. And I got really mad at God. And that's kind of where the seed, the seeds were already planted of being a prodigal, because I wasn't really into Jesus. I was into the culture. Mm. And then just kind of fell away and spent 7 years working for a drug dealer. And I was a drug addict for 7 years, and was 25 when I toured in a punk band for 7 years. We did like Vans Warped Tour and all that kind of stuff, and played we used to play Prince's nightclub in Minneapolis.
Wow. Were you on vocals?
Strings. Yeah, vocals and guitar.
Nice.
And so, but it's been a very long time. We were vocals and guitar in two different bands, but the band that was most famous, I guess, that we were in, I just did vocals. And we were kind of like Rage Against the Machine style music. And, but yeah, I did that for a number of years. When I was 25, had a drug overdose and heart attack. And I was living at the time with a lesbian that I was sleeping with, and also dating a stripper witch.
Wait. So you were sleeping with a lesbian?
Yeah.
That is crazy. How does that even
happen?
That definition's kind of weird.
So this is because it's a weird blurred line, right? Because it's like we were roommates, and we went to high school together. And she said, after we crossed that line, I asked her, like, "Why you're a lesbian?" She never had been with a guy. And I was like, why me? And she's like, honestly, I watched you in high school, and I watched how you treated your girlfriend and how much you loved her. And she said, and I always wanted someone to love me that same way.
Wow.
And she's like, and so I just wanted to know what that felt like.
Everyone's searching for love,
right?
Like they say. It's crazy.
Yeah. And so, but her and I lived together for a few years. And then I started dating this stripper witch that I didn't know was a stripper witch. I just met her at a bar. We played a bowling alley.
Wow. That's the craziest title, like a stripper witch.
Oh, yeah.
As if one's already heavy enough.
Right, yeah.
It's crazy.
So I found out in the ER when I overdosed, the witch took me to the ER, and my heart was at 244 beats per minute for over 2 hours, and they thought I was going to die.
Wow.
And they finally stabilized me, and she came into the room and was like, if I'm late to work, once I get fired, I got to go. And she's like, I was giving you good thoughts when you were on the roof of the club where I was having my heart attack. And I was like, good thoughts? I said, are you a Christian? And she said, no, I'm a witch. I practice Wicca.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, so I didn't know she was a witch, but and then I was like, well, you're late once, you're fired. What do you do? She said, I'm a stripper.
Wow, that's crazy.
And so what's really nutty is her name has two different meanings. I never share her name when I share my testimony.
Yeah.
But her name in the negative means house of misery.
Wow.
And in the positive, it means house of figs.
Really?
Right. So like one brings life and one brings death, right?
Wow.
And after we broke up, because, I went through the heart surgery and all that and had an encounter with the Lord that next day, had an encounter with the Lord where he showed me my wife, my daughter, all that stuff at the age of 25. I'm 45 now, for those of you listening and watching now. But I broke up with her, and she wound up dating a tattoo artist I worked with. I worked at a tattoo shop at the time.
Did you tattoo?
I did, yeah. I
Really?
tattooed for a number of years, yeah.
Wow.
Apprenticed in Fargo, North Dakota.
Wow.
And did tattooing there in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Wow.
So that kind of dates me a little bit. But that's why I have a tribal tattoo. But she, yeah, I mean, I broke up with her and she started dating this guy. They both got hooked on meth and entered a suicide pact together.
Wow.
And he killed himself in front of her. And she couldn't do it. So she took an entire sheet of acid.
Wow.
And lost her mind. And I found this out years later. I was preaching at a church actually in Fargo, North Dakota. And the pastor is a woman that leads it, and her husband co-leads with her. He's a physician. And I was sharing my testimony there, and he's like, "Can I ask you a question?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Is this her name?" And he said her name, and I was like, "Yeah."
Wow.
And he goes, "I was the admitting physician in the psych ward where she's at."
No way.
And so she's lost her mind completely.
Jeez.
But the Lord said, "That was your future."
Wow.
I would have been dead, and she would have been in the, hospital.
Wow.
So, I mean, the things he said, but at the time, everything in my life where I ran from God and where I used drugs and did all those things, all stemmed from heartbreak, from a girl that I loved. My friend dying was terrible, but it hurt worse that my girlfriend broke up with me, and I found out the whole time she had been cheating and all this stuff. And I've shared this before when I preach, but I chased the ghost of her and every other girl. Every girl I dated after that was just like her.
Jeez.
Trying to find somebody to fix this hole, to be like, please, somebody treat me right, and I didn't find that until I found my wife. Even after I became a Christian, I started, I don't want to say casually dating, because I know Christians don't like that, right? But I also wasn't dating to marry anybody yet. I
Recreational dating.
Right.
Yep.
I was dating girls to be like, okay, do we get along? You know, like I don't like to make it overly spiritual. So I was like, do we get along? Are we connecting? And still, those girls had the same kind of issues. And so it wasn't until I found my wife that cycle got broke.
Wow.
But
that's crazy. What do you think? I mean, at any time that you're in this, because you said you're a PK preacher's kid. Is there any moment when you're going through this backsliding state, like this crazy life? I mean, you have a heart attack. That's crazy. There's so much stuff happening. At any point, do you kind of like just sit back and just think like the prodigal son style, where he's eating with the pigs? Like, you ever get that moment a couple of times? Oh,
yeah.
Did you ever get that at all?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So also, since I was a kid, I could hear the Holy Spirit. I thought everybody heard God the same way. That's why I was like, well, I still believed in God even when I was a drug addict and running from him. I could still hear him. There's nights I'd lay in my bed and I could hear Jesus weeping over me, or I could hear the murmuring of prayers.
Wow.
Of like people from my childhood, from my church, from family members. I could hear the murmur. It'd drive me crazy.
Wow.
Be laying there in bed and couldn't sleep, and I'd have to take more Vicodin to try to kill the noise, get all that out of my head. And so, but there's definitely times of filth that like I would wake up the next morning and just be like, what have I become? And so 7 years I worked for a drug dealer, right? 4 of those 7 years I worked in debt collection.
Really?
So when people owed him money or product, me and 2 other really giant guys would go visit them. I was the mouthpiece and they were the muscle. So there was guys that I physically tortured.
Wow.
And guys that were forever like disfigured.
Wow.
And there'd be times, because I was the kind of kid, I always would beat up the bully that was beating up the weaker kids, right? I would go fight. Even if I couldn't win the fight, I'd still go scrap with the bully to protect the other kids. I was just always that way. If an animal got hurt when I was little, I would cry. Like, I was just very tender as a kid. And, but yeah, there's definitely some dark nights of doing some dark stuff, because when you're in that lifestyle, you have to be creative you want people to fear you, because I'm not big. I'm 5'6". The guys with me were giant. People were petrified of them in the beginning, but then my nickname was the Joker, because I used to wear makeup.
Wow.
Right. And I was so sadistic that I would come up with new ways to torture people.
Wow. And
so there would be times where I would kind of come to my senses in these real moments of depression, where I would just be like, I'm in filth. Like there's no hope for me. Like, and then I would remember when I was a kid, like being of sober mind as a child and going to Easter at church and just these things of like being in grade school and loving Jesus, but not really knowing who he was. But still, that was even better than where I was. But there was definitely, in Luke 15, it says the prodigal son came to his senses.
Yeah.
And I had those moments where I was like, none of these people love me. The girls I'm sleeping with don't love me. They love my money. They love that they can get high anytime they want, but they don't love me. So there'd be those moments where you're just like, everything is shadow. You're starving, but surrounded by pigs.
Right. What would you say to like parents and stuff? Because I think there's so many preachers that the PK thing, like everybody knows, like whether it's a daughter or son, they always go out and do their thing. They're like horrible people, and then they'll come back one day. But what is it that you think that parents can do? Like, let's say there's a pastor or preacher watching this, and he's like, I don't want my kid to go down that same stereotype. Is there anything that you think that can help? Is it just that free will? Because like you said, God will never violate your free will. So what is it, or what kind of advice would you give parents maybe that are in that position?
I would say it's very important to be transparent and to remove shame from any conversation with your kid. At an early age, I learned to become hidden, right? So like when I was in grade school, like grade 4, like most young boys, I discovered my body. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And so I started learning, nobody's teaching me these things.
Right.
I'm stumbling on them as I'm growing. Nobody in my family's talking to me about the birds and the bees, because it's awkward.
Right.
Right. And so I got caught. Right. I got caught by my dad. And my dad's comment to me wasn't like, hey, let's talk about it. And I love my dad. He's my spiritual father and my earthly father. We're super close. So Dad, if you're watching this, you did not fail. I love you. And we've talked about it. But I had to go through therapy, because when my dad caught me, it wasn't, hey, let's talk about this and explain, what you're feeling and what you're going through, and talk about hormones. And, it was, his response was, which one of your friends taught you to do this? And I was like, wait, what? Like, why would one of my friends do that? Like, it brought confusion into my life. And not with same-sex attraction, just where it made me feel so dirty and bad that I had to become hidden, because now I'm a monster. So like years later, when I went through Theophostics, through inner healing, and through counseling with a licensed therapist, we went through memories to heal memories, right? That's what Theophostics is let the Holy Spirit breathe on a memory to heal it. Well, that memory came up, and I was like, and I saw myself, because the adult version of you goes into the memory with Jesus. Okay, so you imagine yourself walking into the memory with Jesus, and you see the scene and the scenario play out. So I'm there seeing myself treat my body like a playground, right? My dad busts me, and I turn around in this vision or thought. Yeah. It was super real. And I turn around, and I have the face of a monkey. Like, I don't have my normal face. Wow. And I start freaking out in this session going, I have a demon. It's a demon. It's a demon. And the counselor's like, it's not a demon, Luke. Relax. And so I calmed down, and it felt so real. And he goes, it's not a demon. That's how you see yourself in that situation. You see yourself as a beast. Wow. And he goes, and that caused you to become hidden. And I was like, oh, and so that produced kind of this seed of hiddenness of like, you're broken. There's something sexually wrong with you. I had stuff in my childhood where a cousin molested me and then went to the family, an older cousin went to the family and said, I did it. Wow. And nobody came to me to talk to me about it. So just like all these plans from the devil to ruin my destiny. But the best thing a parent can do is be open and remove shame. Like, if your kid's questioning God, don't get mad at them. That means they're making their faith their own. When parents are like, can't you just believe? It's like, that doesn't work. Like, have the dialogue. I believe true faith is formed on the verge of atheism.
Wow. Say that again.
That true faith is formed on the verge of atheism, where we come in and we question everything we believe. Why do I believe this? Does this really work? Wow. Is this historically accurate? Where we ask, God's not intimidated by our questions. People are. And I think if parents can get to that place where they're like, look, I'm not going to, and it's tough, right? I'm a parent. I get it. Like, there's a lot of love involved. There's a lot of emotion involved. That's your kid. You would burn the world to the ground to save that kid, but a lot of times parents, they apply pressure in the wrong way. They're not open. Had somebody come to me and been like, what do you think about God? Like, and not shamed me. Cause there was times where I met people that were pastors when I was a prodigal, when I was a drug addict, just even at the beginning of being a prodigal, that I would ask questions to, and they're like, that's inappropriate to ask God.
Wow.
You know, and I was like, okay. So it was like, again, be hidden, lead a double life. God's not pleased with you because they're representing God to me. So now I know God thinks I'm dirty, so I might as well be dirty. I'm not good enough for him anyway. So that those are all the kind of, so if you're a parent out there listening, love your kid and be open and do not shame them. There's, in the Greek, the word guilt, right, is conviction. Conviction in the Greek means guilt, proof of guilt. So when the Holy Spirit convicts us, he proves that we're guilty and says, hey, you're guilty. You need to repent of this so I can heal it. And parents often, and people, not just parents, but parents do this a lot, where they confuse conviction with condemnation. So they condemn their child. Condemnation means you're no longer fit to be used. So you're a throwaway. You're garbage. So then we're like, oh, I'm not good enough for God. Instead of conviction saying, hey, this is why you shouldn't sleep with your girlfriend. Condemnation comes along and goes, you're a worm for sleeping with your girlfriend, right? So it's language.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if people haven't noticed already, you are a completely open book. You know, you haven't gotten too much as far as what you do because you're humble, you know, but I could say you're one of the craziest, best prophets we know. Like accuracy, like I'm not going to give away what happened at our service because just in case you want to use that intro for another, church, but you came in to our service at harvest time, like so different than anyone. Like when I found out, I told our media team what was going to happen. I was blown away. Like, I can't believe this intro is going to happen, but you're so out of the box. But with Donald Trump, his whole thing was like, make America great again. With you, it's like, make prophets like cool again. Make prophets like, like people again. Because I think for so long, and I think you've shared this before, we joke about this still. I don't know if you know this, but you said one time on the mic, there was like a level 10 prophet you met with like a sword and staff. Like people are weird, but like talk about the prophetic. Let's kind of pivot there because the prophetic is something, like I said, it's been abused. I'll just go into it real quick. Friend and I were just recently talking about a prophet that, was a big prophet and stuff. And we found out he got exposed for like finding people on Facebook. And then, going through this stuff and then calling it out, but he had already read it. And just, there's a lot of stuff. So people are so hurt when it comes to the prophetic. They don't want anything to do with it. It messes up churches. Issues happen. Talk a little bit about the prophetic and just your take on it. Your, I guess just the way you kind of run your ministry, because it's so unique, but man, you reach people that no one else can reach out there. So just talk a little bit about the prophetic.
So one of the things that I'm passionate about is normalizing the prophetic, because people have made it so unattainable. They've made it like the chosen few, when really there's tons of different expressions of prophets in the Bible: dancing prophets, laughing prophets, weeping prophets, artistic prophets. In the case of Ezekiel, autistic prophets. Like there's all sorts of different expressions of prophets, and it's the modern charismatic movement that's damaged the prophetic, which is unfortunate because that's the movement it's most productive in right now. But we're experiencing where, we're having Methodist churches bring us in, Dutch Reformed churches have brought us in. I did a prophetic seminar at a Nazarene church. They don't believe in prophecy or speaking in tongues. And they are now a spirit-filled Nazarene church in Spring, Texas. So, I mean, we're getting brought into these places, and I want to normalize the prophetic because it's a part of our heritage in the Word of God. And it's one of the ascension gifts of Jesus. Before he left, he's like, I'm giving you this so that we can imagine somebody you love gave you FaceTime, right? And they're like, look, I'm going to go and you're never going to see me. Well, you won't see me until a certain date, right? It'll feel like never, right? But we're going to get on this FaceTime and we can talk anytime you want. So, imagine your father died or your grandfather, and they're like, hey, where I'm going, we can FaceTime. So you'll never be without me. Like, that's how valuable. Some people, it's like, oh, my mom died, and I would do anything to talk to her again.
Right.
Okay, well, you have a Father in heaven that can talk to you. And so my goal is to teach biblical examples of the prophetic. Again, the charismatic movement has made it so weird and so personality driven. And we contend with a lot of different things right now. Like, the prophecies about Donald Trump, right? Saying Donald Trump would be in office in 3 days, and he wasn't. And these prophets failed. And I had churches cancel me.
Really?
And I didn't even chime in on it. You know, I had news media, like Christian news media, reach out to me and say, when's, you know, friends of mine that are ministry famous, they're like, hey, if you really want to know what's going on, you talk to this guy, Luke. Like, he's got insight we don't have.
Wow.
Like, so 3 of these guys pointed these networks to me. They reached out and they're like, when will he be in office? And I was like, the Lord's not telling me that. The Lord's talking to me about the danger of church mixing too much politics with their culture. That we're kingdom. You know, we've got some churches that they're not making Christians, they're making Republicans. And we need Christians first. And then you can vote the Bible at the booth.
That's
you know?
good.
But I just think with the prophetic, I'm passionate about it being normal because I've seen so much weird. I've seen so much extra biblical stuff. I was at a conference where a guy's like, I see an angel in the corner of the room and he's juggling women's breasts. And I'm like, what? Right? Like, there's like 2,000 people at this conference.
Jeez.
I'm on the stage and he's like, so if you've lost a breast to breast cancer, go over in this corner and this angel will give you a breast.
Wow.
And me and the other guys that are up on the platform, we're not vibing with this at all. We're like, this, no, we don't feel that. That's right. Like, prophets confirm. And you're not, yes, I understand that God does healing physically. I've seen people healed. I've seen fingers grow back that were cut off. Like, I've seen crazy stuff. 4 people raised from the dead in the 20 years that I've been doing this.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And where I was there, I physically saw it, and I was like, I'm a doubting Thomas by nature, which it's not a brag. Right? That's not a good thing. But it's hilarious that God made me a prophet, and I'm the one that's always looking for wires and looking under chairs for, like, did somebody hide something under here? You know, because I want it to be real. And so, like, I got up and shut down what he was doing, that ministry time. I was like, nope, no, that's not happening. Women were already over there. And guess what? No breast, right?
Man.
And so we see stuff like that, and it makes me swing the pendulum the other way to go, okay, let's like, people think prophecy is all future this and future that and Gog and Magog and all this kind of end time prophecy, but there's a way more accessible, approachable, prophetic understanding of 1 Corinthians 14:3 for edification and exhortation, to build up, to encourage. So me even just being around you and going like, man, I don't know, I just feel like you just need to know that you're a good son, right? That is prophecy. That is powerful prophecy because it's identity-driven prophecy. You know, and that's part of the reason I'm so passionate about it is a lot of the charismatic movement has had its time with prophecy, and they've turned it into a circus. Not all of them.
Right.
There's some great ministers out there that I admire that are godly people. Chris Valentin, right? Chris Valentin missed it about Donald Trump. And he came out the very next day and was like, I missed it. I don't know why I missed it. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to recalibrate. That was so humble and such a good way to go. But people still ate his lunch, you know? And so people tend to throw out the baby with the bathwater. They're like, see, that's why this prophecy stuff doesn't work. And it's like, no, it does work. I'll have pastors that people have no understanding of prophecy. That's why we teach on it. I want people to understand it. I'll have pastors that are like, okay, so today at the service, I want you to give 10 words. And I want them to be, you know, these people. I'm like, it doesn't work that way.
It's crazy.
And then, you know, like you said about Facebook, I've faced that. Where I get a word of knowledge. You know, the Lord speaks to me a lot through the Strong's Concordance. So he'll line up different numbers with words and scriptures that I'm reading. And it'll turn out that Strong's Concordance is the last 4 of this pastor's wife's cell phone number. Right? Like stuff like that. And people are like, oh, he had to get that on social media. It's like, well, how would I get that, first of all? But we have to contend in an information age for purity. That's why I don't Google stuff. I don't search stuff out. I tell pastors, don't tell me anything about your church. Because I believe that God wants to reclaim the ascension gift, you know, to make it healthy and normal. We need it now more than ever. Just forget like advancing culture and like we talked about on Sunday with creating new inventions and all that stuff. Forget all that. That stuff aside, we need to encourage people. And people need hope. And that's what the prophetic brings. And if the enemy can kill the voice of God, then God is now an idol of stone with no voice, no power.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And I would classify you as a sheep in wolf's clothing. You're tattooed. You got the freshest dunks on sometimes, ripped jeans on the stage, like going against like, you know, the culture of church, you know, and stuff. And it's just like, but you're right on and stuff. But that's crazy.
Can I speak to that for a second?
Yeah.
So I love doing that because it's only in church culture that we're allowed to be 10 years behind in fashion. Like in church culture, people are like, well, this is what success looks like in church. And I'm like, I had a pastor that was like, well, you should get an Italian suit like me. And it's like this double-breasted, like 1992 suit.
Wow.
And I was like, how much did you pay for that suit? He's like, it was $1,500. And I was like, okay. I said, well, these Chicago ones that I have on are worth 6 times what your suit's worth. And I said, so if you're talking about bringing your best, like, I think that the church should be cutting edge with fashion, not to be progressive, not to trick people to be like, look how cool my church is, but that's me. Like, I like street fashion. I like, the intro I did on Sunday. People, I'm always pushing the envelope. I started doing stand-up comedy. I started doing all this stuff because I look at guys that are not Christian. Like, somebody I like a lot is Bo Burnham. And so I'll watch his comedy specials, and something about his comedy specials speaks to me because he uses music. He uses things that people know, and he'll do these musical numbers that you'll be laughing and then crying the next second. Like, it's very thought-provoking. And the Lord spoke to me one day and was like, this is the kind of stuff I want you to use to open up hearts, open up doors, and then you can... Humor and comedy is such a great weapon against the devil. Because, first of all, it causes people to drop their guard. So all the bias, all the pain, all the frustration, all that stuff sits down while they're laughing, and then you can get arrows of truth in there to heal somebody's heart. And that's kind of how we operate. But I'm always working on, like, the idea of using backdrops and making it more theatrical to pull people in, not to manipulate, not to trick people, but to couple with the Lord on a plan that's visually appealing, and opens up people's hearts.
That's good. I mean, with that, so, I think you and I kind of have the same take on that, but, let's say, we've heard, the flip side of that is like, the altar is a place of reverence and the church is a place of reverence. I don't know. I kind of battle with that myself because I get what you're saying and I'm kind of the same way. But then sometimes I'm like, but where do we draw the line where we still have reverence for God and stuff like that? So sometimes for me, it's kind of hard. I'm trying to I battle that a lot. And I think we battle that as we go. You're either like too on one side or you're too much on the other. But that middle is like where you want to be, What would you say that, how do you still show reverence and all that stuff and still value, church and everything, but still have that freedom?
Right. So reverence is a heart posture, not a fashion. Right. So reverence is in the heart, and your heart will produce fruit that honors God. So you could be wearing ripped jeans, you can be wearing Jordans and producing healthy fruit in your life of a mature believer, right? So like in the word, it says, it talks about avoid strange fire, right? That whole story is they didn't want to wait for the prophet Samuel to come, right? They didn't want to wait for him to come and do the sacrifice, right? Is that who it is, Samuel? Yeah. I was like, brain.
Fact check.
Yeah. I'm like, wait, let me fact check there because the internet's not kind. So they're supposed to wait for Samuel to offer the sacrifice. They don't want to wait for him. So these guys do their own sacrifice. And fire of God comes out and burns them to death. And it talks about avoid strange fire. It was offensive to God because, and this is when you study it in the Hebraic, this is what it means. The reason it's strange fire, people use it against prophecy. They're like, oh, avoid charismatics and avoid prophetic, avoid strange fire. That's not what it means. Strange fire to God was because they were doing an intimate act without intimacy in their hearts. They weren't priests. They weren't intimate. They were like, let's get it over with. And so reverence really is a heart posture. Think about other cultures. I think a lot of time we get stuck and pigeonholed into looking at Christianity through the Western lens. But I mean, I've been to other nations and First Nations reservations, and when I'm in an Arikara reservation or Sioux reservation, and they're wearing all their tribal gear and they're banging their drums and they're worshiping God, right? Like, I don't mean, oh, I think they're worshiping God. These are spirit-filled believers that are beating their tribal drums, wearing traditional native gear. Worshiping the Great Spirit and Jesus, right? And they're calling on the name of Jesus. They're worshiping Jesus. And people would get offended at that if they didn't understand the language.
Right.
They'd be like,
witchcraft.
You're coming here with a bone in your hair. There's that's the dead. You shouldn't have the bone of the dead in your hair. And it's like, no, like with their tradition, that's not what it means. Just like when you talk about culture matters, right?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times people want to become performance driven, right? They're like, well, reverence means stoicness. It means being serious, being quiet, dressing well to show just how much you respect God. But I've met too many empty tombs and nice suits. You know, like people that got no God in them at all, but they look the part. And that's the reason the charismatic movement's in the trouble it's in, is we've allowed people to be promoted into positions of authority that have no God in them. They're just talented.
Yeah.
And people aren't discerning because they don't have a spiritual life on their own either. So Pew Research did a poll, and it was like 70% of Christians don't read their Bibles.
Wow.
So you got people that are ignorant, unread, unlearned about Jesus that can't fact check a pastor. And then you've got this pastor that could care less about God, really. It's a hustle. I've met a lot of these businessmen, right? They're not pastors, they're just businessmen behind a pulpit.
Jeez.
You know, juxtaposed to your father, right? Who's a businessman and a pastor.
Right.
You know, but we run into the opposite a lot of times. And so I get it, because like I still struggle with it where, like, if I'm on stage and I'm wearing a baseball cap, I have to take it off. Right. And I still struggle with that, where I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I know we're free. Like, I know God doesn't care that I'm wearing one up here, but I still struggle with it at times. So we all do. We all wrestle with it.
That's funny. I mean, you have been, you've been on Isaiah Saldivar, who's like crazy in deliverance. You know, you've been on the other side where people don't even believe in this, you know, not even speaking in tongue. I feel like so many spheres are open to you and stuff. I mean, and you're under Bishop Bill Hamon, correct? Which I gotta say, you do the best impression of Bishop, and you don't do it in a disrespectful way, but you do it. I'm not gonna ask you to do it. You do it so well. It's so crazy. But you're under Bishop, and so that's so cool. I want to actually explain that real quick, how that happened, because that's really cool in itself. We had him here a couple months ago, and I think he said it was his last trip out here. He's getting old and stuff like that. But so Bishop is so amazing. But explain that real quick. How did that happen?
Yeah, he'll be 88 next year, and so when I was a kid, I could prophesy, right? I just knew stuff. I was dreaming. I would know stuff. My parents were like, they're spirit filled. So they're like, okay, we need to train him. So they would teach me out of the Bible. But then these books started to be written in the 80s by Bishop Bill Hamon on prophecy, pitfalls of prophecy, the benefits of prophecy. So they started teaching me out of that stuff. And then, then fast forward all these years later, I'm in Houston with my wife, and my cell phone rings, and I'm like, hello? And it's Bishop, but I don't know him. You know, I don't know his voice. He's like, is this Luke Holter? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, this is Bishop Bill Hamon. God spoke to me. I'm supposed to ordain you as a prophet to the nations. God's picked you, and you're a Samuel. He knew nothing about the Samuel Institute or the Samuel Company, all that stuff that we do. And so he flew me and my wife and daughter to Florida, and we went to CI. And him and Chuck Pierce and Dutch Sheets and all these people were there and sat us in this green room and just prophesied over us for 2 hours. Wow. And I don't say I'm ordained under CI, right? Christian International. I'm ordained under Bishop. Now, my papers are CI, right? And I give to CI, but Bishop is who I talk to on a weekly basis. And again, I'm not trying to separate the two in a shady way, but I don't have a lot of relationship with CI. It's with Bishop. Even now, working on new curriculum, he's put me as the standard bearer to take his torch, to start being the voice that teaches on prophecy. Even though there's a great lady, Elizabeth T.M. Fook, who's taking over for Bishop at CI in that regard. But Bishop's passed on to me the mantle of, like, I want you to be the prophet of my prophet of your generation.
That's heavy.
And so I knew I was going to love Bishop when I went into his office and saw him, their school there. They've had thousands of students graduate from their ministry school. And on his wall in a framed photo is Johnny Cash.
Really?
Him and him shaking hands. Yeah, he graduated from his prophecy school.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Johnny Cash wanted more revelation and creativity in writing music.
Wow.
And so he took their courses on how to hear the Holy Spirit.
I had no clue.
Right? I didn't either.
And Johnny Cash definitely got saved after Billy Graham and everything. But everyone knows him for the flipping off, that famous picture. But he got saved, and he even said, a real man, the hardest thing, I don't know, he said, a real man is someone that can follow Christ. That was like the coolest quote. I was like, dang, not many people know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, Johnny Cash loved Jesus. But seeing that, I was like, no, I'm down with Bishop. Like, I'm down with anybody that's going to ordain
That's cool.
You know, Johnny Cash. Yeah.
That's crazy. So kind of going back to, like I said earlier, the people that you're connected with, what is it that you think? Because I know with you, and I think you said this on Isaiah's podcast, like, you know, you're not there like promoting yourself and calling people and getting opportunity. It's like word of mouth. I think I know who. I think it might have been my dad who told Isaiah about you. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. I'm pretty sure. But then, you know, Matt Cruz, we connect with him. It's like I feel like everyone that we know and connect with, somehow they like know you and stuff. It's wild. But how, explain that, because I think a lot of people, especially when they start getting, you know, start getting a little following, they kind of push that a little bit. And they like are always like, you know, hey, when can I come to your church? When can I come to your church? Talk to that. Maybe there's someone's watching and they're starting to, you know, or they feel like God's calling them. What advice can you give them, you know, scheduling, going to churches? Is there any churches that you say no to? Are you open to every church? Kind of give us some insight on how you move as a minister.
So, I pray whenever I get an invitation, regardless of where it's from. I've turned down churches of 15,000 and I've turned down churches of 10. You know, I mean, to me, it's just wherever God says go, I go. You have to fight the urge to self-promote. And because ministry, a lot of times, especially for someone like me who's itinerant. So for those of you that don't know what that means, you know, I travel for a living. Yeah. So I depend on speaking at churches to pay my bills and to fund our ministry, to fund our orphanages, all of that. And so early on, people would reach out to me and be like, you got to start branding. You got to do more branding. You got to buy more ads. You've got to hire a publisher, you know, like all this kind of stuff, a publicist, I mean. They're like, you got to hire all these people and get your brand going. And I just had no interest in that. I was just like, it's so much work. Right? Yeah. And if God's on it, then he'll put me where I need to be. And I think because of what I experienced in the music industry, right? Like sending out promo kits, getting turned down, having hard conversations, meeting with record labels, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I'm just not into. Even my books that I've published with major publishing houses, I didn't want to do those. And I told them no many times. Wow. And then, you know, their main thing was, well, don't you want to be well known? And I was like, no, I don't care. Like, so they were trying to get me to get into ego to publish. But they finally published the books and they put all the skin in the game, right? I gave them the books. They did all the stuff, you know? But I think it's really funny what you said about like Matt, the different people that you guys meet that somehow know me. Yeah. So I'm really well known in green rooms. Not publicly, not on all that stuff. Yeah. And I found the avenue that works best for me. And sometimes I would get frustrated. I've prophesied movements, books, churches. I prophesied a church into existence in Houston that became the fastest growing, largest church in the US. Wow. And I was completely cut off from it. Really? Yes. Yeah, 100%. I started in 2012. I started a movement in Houston, 2011, called Hope City, right? And I've got video of us holding these events. We brought Leland in to lead worship for Hope City. And then our guitar player left and went to this church, like a church meeting, like we're going to start a church in North Houston. And they said, he goes, let's call it Hope City. So they took the name. No way. I already owned the website. Wow. And so the pastor would reach out to me through other people. He wouldn't contact me himself, but he'd be like, hey, can we buy the website from you or just have it? You know, and I'm like, tell you what, I'm a part of your prophetic story. Whether you want it to be or not, the Lord prophetically spoke to me about Hope City that would be a young adult movement, right? And I said, so I'll tell you what, bring me into your church. You don't have to pay me at all. I'm not asking for an honorarium, any of that. Just bring me in and I can share my prophetic puzzle piece with the people. And he's like, oh, no, I'm not doing that. He didn't want any association with me. Wow. Because he didn't want people to know that it was taken. And I wasn't going to say that. Yeah, yeah. And so it got to this place where they would reach out periodically month after month, you know, and that rubbed me the wrong way. And so when I was talking to the Lord about it in prayer, I was like, I'm offended. And he's like, okay, you're a baby. And I was like, I'm a baby. And he's like, yeah, you're being a baby. And I was like, Lord, I've prophesied this movement, this thing happened, this book got put out, this thing got purchased, and you know, all these things that started and went on to, my name's left out of all of it. And he's like, out of their books, not out of my book. That's good. And he's like, whose book matters? What ledger matters? Man. And the Lord said, being a prophet a lot of times means you convince people to throw a party you'll never be invited to. And you got to be okay with it.
Yeah.
And these guys that were like, I prophesied over this guy he was doing these national conferences that were bringing in 50,000 people.
Wow.
I prophesied that happening.
Wow.
And a book that he wrote about it and helped him write the book. And he's like, you're going to be at every event, every major outreach and outpouring we do. You're going to be there. Nope. Not a phone call, nothing. And I was like walking through the offense of that. And the Lord, when he said, you know, it means you convince people to have a party you're not invited to. Once I swallowed that pill and was like, okay, yeah, it's not about me and their books. It's not about me being remembered by men. But it's funny because those same pastors and evangelists and whatever that are doing these big things that have cut me out, I'm still the guy they call at midnight when they're depressed and need a word.
Man.
And at first I was like, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
You know, and the Lord finally got me to a place where I had worked out, I'm famous in heaven.
That's good.
That's enough.
That's good. Yeah.
Because fame on earth, if I can speak frankly, it sucks. Like, I know Bill Johnson. I'm friends with Bill and other people. They're tortured, like with emails and attacks. And like, Bill Johnson said this statement one time, I'm one argument away from a breakdown.
Wow.
Like, that is awful.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not ministry famous.
Yeah.
And I get probably 300 emails a day. And it's stuff from, I love your ministry, thank you so much, to I've hired an Islamic assassin that's going to kill you. Like, all sorts of stuff.
It's crazy.
And I can't imagine what these other guys go through.
Yeah. And no, that's crazy. You know, something that you said, like, you know, that was, as we were just talking and stuff, I was just thinking, like, it's crazy how, you know, when it comes to, like, you know, green rooms, you know, being ministry famous, like, I think for you, like, whenever I think about you and stuff, I'm just like, man, like, I think you said it one time, like the life of a prophet is like very lonely, you know, it's like very, very lonely. You know, when you're in the green room, when you're seeing people get the light and everything, like, you know, like you said, well, you know, God, but is there any moments that you kind of just break down? You're just like, man, like, I'm kind of done. Like, have you ever got to that moment as far as like
all the time,
like, I'm done with ministry
all the time.
Like, I'm done with this.
Probably once every 2 months, because I will see something so shady done. Like, literally, there's a revival going on in California. I'm not going to say what city.
Yeah.
And it's being professed as this longest running revival. And there's no revival at all. I was brought in to speak at it. And they are lying about miracles. They're lying about all this stuff that's going on. I sat in the car, like, sitting next to the guy that's doing this big revival crusade that all these big names are coming to because they're not discerning. They're just going, oh, we know him. I'm sure it's legit. And it's not. Like, where he's like, hey, we're going to do this big outreach in the Middle East, right? And so he gets a phone call, puts it on speaker. I'm in the car, right? It's through the speakerphone of his car.
Yeah.
And I listen to him negotiate with this guy that's going to help him put on the conference. And the guy's like, okay, my friend, listen. For $60,000, I can guarantee you 30,000 salvations.
Jeez.
He's like, that's 30,000 of our locals that we'll pay a small stipend to. We'll feed them. They'll wave at the cameras. They'll, you know, they'll say that they're accepted. They're all Muslim.
Wow.
And he's like, they'll all say they're becoming Christians. And, you know, if you need people for healing, that'll be extra money. They'll come up and say they were healed of something. And he's like, no, man, listen. You gave my friend a better deal than that. Right? No. I thought he was going to shut him down.
Yeah, shut him down.
No, and he's like, I'll give you 40,000 for 30,000 salvations.
Jeez.
And he's like, okay, my friend, you got me. It's all a scam.
Man.
And people in the church are not discerning. And I see stuff like that, and I see that guy exploding in ministry. And I'm not saying his name. I'm not saying where he's from.
Can we stop right there? Because so many people, when they find out information like that, there's so many YouTube channels, Christian channels that expose. All they do is expose. Why don't you do that? What do you really feel like God's saying? Like, don't do that. Like, exposing people, because then they'll use scripture. Like, you know, you should expose people, or you know, you should call false prophets out.
Right.
How do you navigate not saying anything?
Right.
And how do you, when people, because I've done that before. We know something about somebody, and someone be like, oh, this guy is so amazing, but you know the backstory.
Yeah.
Is there times that you do say something, or do you usually just say, like, you just not get involved? Like, explain that. That's so tough.
I know. And that's what I struggle with, because I have a strong sense of justice, right? And the way I grew up in the punk rock movement is you expose stuff like that. And early on in ministry, I faced another situation like that, where somebody had lied to me and my family and then publicly went out in front of a bunch of people and said stuff that wasn't true. And I addressed it. I literally did a Facebook Live.
Wow.
And, you know, I don't have a lot. I got like 15,000 followers. A bunch of people jumped on it. I'm like, all right, I'm going to set the record straight right now about this. And I got so lambasted. And that guy and all of his friends and his connections and his ministry people all gathered together against me.
Wow.
And started lying in larger numbers. And the people in their congregations aren't discerning, so they don't know. They're just like, oh, you just believe pastor. It's like, no, he's lying for this guy because they have a land deal together in Nigeria.
Jeez.
That's why, right? So there's,
Yeah.
I worked for drug dealers that had more ethics than some ministers,
Man.
which is sad to say. But
Yeah.
when you're talking about exposing somebody, like if I were to come out and say, this is who the person is, this is what they did, that person has a louder voice than I do. Again,
Yeah.
I'm not ministry famous.
Right.
They are, which means now they go to the rest of the body of Christ on God TV, Sid Roth, and start talking about the Leviathan spirit I have, right?
Right.
And they start doing all that. Now, people that are undiscerning will go, oh, yeah, I always knew there's something off about Luke. Oh, he must have, you know, he's just bitter. Or, you know, like people will believe it instantly and it will destroy my family. So I think about my wife and my daughter, right? And what I'm bringing into my house.
Right.
And this is what I do.
Yeah.
I try to do Matthew 18, right? So I'll go to the individual. So I went to this person and I said, what you are doing is ungodly and it's unhealthy and it's demonic.
Like one-on-one?
One-on-one. And he told me I was an idiot and that he would bury me. He's like, I will bury you. He's like, all your relationships gone in a day.
How does your flesh thought? You were a debt collector, punk rock band. Like, people don't know punk rock. Like, you know, one of my friends, he was in punk rock in the 90s here in LA. Mosh pit crazy.
Oh, yeah, dude.
I mean, grimy stuff.
Yeah.
You're an ex-punker.
Yeah.
Debt collector.
Yeah.
Worked in a tattoo shop.
Yep.
Like, in the streets. How does your flesh not come out?
I'm a new creation. I have to remind myself. And the thing too is, as you get older, right?
Yeah.
Desires change. You're slower witted, but you're also slower to lose your temper.
Yeah.
And so like, I think about my daughter, right? So it's like, I could, because my urge would be in the flesh to punch him in the mouth. That would be my urge, to be like, God's going to judge you and punch him in the face.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go to jail. I'm going to go to court. He's going to sue me because he's a worm, right? Like, obviously, by the way he's acting, he's going to go for gusto. But I went to him. It's hard, though. It's hard to not want vindication.
Man.
Right? But that's why we have to leave vengeance to the Lord. And so I went to him. He wouldn't listen. So I went to a few of his, I guess you'd say, spiritual fathers. And they were like, well, I've known him a lot longer than I've known you. And I mean, I'd have to really, you'd have to show me a recording of it. You know, like they wanted physical evidence before they would even consider talking about it.
Jeez.
And I was like, well, I didn't have my phone handy to pull out and start recording and go, oh, I'm just recording your, you know, your total underhandedness, you know?
Yeah.
And so once his spiritual authorities didn't listen, I knew I was done. I could put it on my Facebook and I would get buried. And it's that thing where it's easy for people in church to look at ministers and be spectators. You know, like there's times we have 3 monthly supporters right now. That's it in our ministry. Everything is just, I go speak somewhere, they pay me. That's how we pay the orphanage. That's how we do all the stuff, right? And so what we run into a lot is people are like, you know, I'll say, hey, we need you to give this month. We've got to raise like 20 grand a month just to meet the minimum needs of the orphanages and the single mothers we help and all that. So I'll go to Facebook sometimes and be like, hey, somebody, you know, pray about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of you that could give even something. And everybody assumes everybody else gave, so then nobody gives, right? And it's that same kind of mentality of like, if I address this publicly and now I'm disinvited from stuff because it's mostly the charismatic circle that brings me in. Yes, I get some great stuff that's Methodist and Lutheran and different things like that, but that doesn't pay the bills.
Right.
You know? And so I would be booted from the charismatic movement. We'd have no money. We'd be, you know, yes, God would take care of us, but he uses people to do that.
Yeah, it'd be difficult.
Right. And so you've got to weigh things a lot differently. And so I had to come to a place like with injustice in the church like that, where I had to go, okay, until I get a platform that can allow me to address those things and not to harm people.
Right.
Like, I don't want to hurt that guy.
Yeah.
I want him to repent. I want him to be changed because he is gifted. But until I get a platform that can do that,
Yeah.
there's nothing I can do.
Yeah. It's crazy. Man, that's tough.
Yeah.
I put myself in your position. I'm like, man, what would I do? That's tough. That's crazy. Talk about, because you just mentioned a little bit right now about the orphanage, about the single mothers. You kind of mentioned it at our service. Talk a little bit about what you've done, kind of what you're involved in now, kind of what you're doing and stuff. And we'll plug in later at the end, kind of all your stuff where people can find you and stuff. But plug in what you're doing right now, what you're up to.
So we have 2 orphanages right now in Bogota, Colombia. And we go in and we rescue sex trafficked children from the age of 5 to 17.
That's so awesome.
And so right now we've got about 90 kids per orphanage.
Wow.
And so we send locals into the sex auctions with money and they buy the kids.
Wow.
It's $1,000 a kid. And so the poverty is so bad there that when a kid can finally start feeding themselves, the parents kick them out because they can't take care of them anymore. It's either I starve to death or you starve to death.
And is this boys and girls?
Boys and girls, yeah. And it's probably like a half and half mix. And so, they have a lot of orphanages in Bogota that are not really orphanages. They're like sex hotels.
Wow.
They say they're orphanages, but Europeans come in and they rent the kids. But these pimps sell these kids for $1,000 a kid. If I go in as a white guy, it's 10 grand. If I go in to buy a kid, if I want to go buy a 5-year-old to do whatever to, they're going to charge me 10 grand. But if a local goes in, they only charge them $1,000.
Wow.
And so we buy the kid, we provide healthcare, medicine. A lot of these kids already have STDs. So we get them on, medical regimens, and we have nurses that come in and take care of them on a daily basis. And we have mothers and fathers that are there on site that take care of the orphans. We teach them U.S. education, and give them a skill set, making necklaces or jewelry or whatever they want to do. Painting, sell their paintings,
Wow.
They can kind of do anything they want in the regard of like a skill. And then we also started this year running connections for adoption. So we got contacted by some people in America that were like, we're trying to adopt a kid, but it's $40,000-$50,000 to adopt a kid. And then when you adopt from China, you don't know what you're going to get necessarily because they pull a lot of bait and switch, and you have to go to China for 6 months to adopt a kid a lot of times. And so there's a lot of nuances that we don't have in Colombia because the government's so corrupt there. We can cut through a lot of red tape. There's times where the local government's like, we're not going to let you buy any more kids.
Really?
And we're like, okay. They're like, until you build us like a power station.
Oh my gosh.
Well, how much is a power station?
Yeah.
$70,000.
Jeez.
Okay. So then I got to go to some multimillionaires I know and hope that one of them does it,
Man.
and then they do it and no power station's ever built, but now we can buy kids again.
Man.
Right. So it's just corruption.
Corrupt, yeah.
But it works in our favor in the regard of now we can get kids adopted, so now we're able to help facilitate that too.
You said there's 90 kids there?
Per orphanage. Yeah. And so there's 2 orphanages right now.
In Colombia?
We have 2.
180?
Yeah, 180 total.
Man, that's awesome.
And so
amazing.
We want to build a 3rd, and so it's through LoveBot International. And the guy that runs that is Mike Rosas, and he's the chaplain for the Houston Rockets.
Okay.
Great guy. But he's who we partner with. We're one of the major fundraisers
That's awesome.
for the orphanage. And then also, aside from that, our nonprofit decided that we wanted to do something locally in Houston. And so I kept running into these single mothers, right? These Thai women in grocery stores that were single mothers that would be ahead of me in line with their baby or their toddler in their cart, and they'd be trying to pay for their groceries, and I'd be like, hey, you know what, I got you. Jesus loves you, and just give them my card. And we found out that a lot of these women were sex trafficked.
Wow.
They were working at massage parlors, and they got sugar daddies that got them pregnant, and then they dropped them and didn't take care of them anymore, right? And most of them aren't even legal. They don't even have their papers. And so what we decided to do was step up to the plate and be like, okay,
That's awesome.
let's pay their rent. Let's pay their car payments. Let's pay for their groceries. Let's pay for all their bills.
Wow.
So right now we have 12 single mothers that we're paying all of their expenses.
Wow.
And even to the point where for 2 of them, we're paying for them to go to esthetician school so that they can learn esthetician and then they can have a legitimate career.
That's amazing.
Right? And all of them that we've worked with, we've coupled them up with others in Houston to get them their citizenship.
Wow.
So these women have all become U.S. citizens now too.
That's
and
crazy.
Empowered, and so.
I've heard a lot of like, we have Orphanage, we have this, we have that, but I've never heard where we kick somebody and pay for everything.
Yeah.
That's like, that approach is crazy.
Yeah. And the Lord spoke to me about it because that's what fathers do. In the church, we throw around a lot of the phrases of like spiritual fathers and mothers, but they're not. They're really not, because spiritual fathers and mothers, they sow time, right?
Yeah.
But they also sow money.
Yeah.
Like
That's
if I'm a dad and my daughter comes to me and she's like, Dad, I really need this. Let's get it done, baby. I'll make it happen. And that was kind of, I felt my prayer every day.
Yeah.
Part of my prayer is, Lord, make me a multimillionaire. And it's not because I want to, drive around in a super nice Lamborghini. I wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know what to do with it anyways. I'd probably sell it and, build another orphanage. But like, it's not to have nice things.
Yeah.
Although I believe that having nice things is okay.
Yeah.
Somebody asked me one time, because I had some Jordans on there, like, must be nice to have that kind of ministry money. And I was like, well, I actually do business consulting as well on the side. So, and I was like, but how many orphans do I have to help before I can have something nice?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you can't measure that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But
crazy.
yeah. And so the Lord challenged me and said, start with one and see if I meet the need. And I was like, all right. So we went to one and I was like, all right, how much do you owe on your car? And she's like, 5,000. And I was like, okay, let's go to the bank. So we went to the bank and I paid off, boom, 5,000. Right. And so then I was like, how much is your rent every month? And she's like, 1,200. And I was like, let's do it. 1,200 a month. Sign me up. Even going as far as going for 2 of them to their apartment complex, not co-signing, but putting myself down as a form of income for them.
Really? Wow.
And the Lord's like, if you take a chance on these people that can do, these women can do nothing for me. I take that back. The one thing they can do for me, which they do every once in a while, is make me delicious Thai food.
That's so good.
But I mean, ultimately, there's nothing they can do for me.
Yeah.
But I've watched, and we get to minister to them and talk to them about Jesus and why we're different, and how God's different than Buddha, and to talk to them about, and so we've had a bunch of them convert from Buddhism to Christianity. That's been a trip.
It's amazing.
Right? Because we focus on Muslims. We've had 2,000 Muslims convert, right? In the last couple of years in our ministry.
Wow.
And now we've got these Buddhists that are like, they believe in karma and they believe in, the circle that never ends. So if you suffer, you do something bad here, you're going to pay for it. The next life, you might have to be a bird that is in thorns the rest of your life for that life until you learn your lesson.
Yeah.
And I said, in Christianity, we don't have a circle. We have a finish line.
Yeah, come on.
And they're like, wait, so when you make a mistake here and you ask for forgiveness, you don't have to pay for it later? And I was like, no, that's what Jesus did. He paid for your circle.
So good.
Right? So you don't have to repeat it.
Yeah.
So
that's so good. That's so good. No, that's so amazing. You're here in LA right now, and I think you had mentioned it at our service and stuff. Like you're like, you said something so funny, but it's so true. So many people have wrote off LA.
Oh yeah.
Like so many people, even in ministry.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm not to like, glorify Harvest Time. No,
Right.
but like, it's very rare right now to find like a really spirit-filled church in this area.
Oh yeah.
Like really hard.
Yeah.
You have a lot of churches in LA for sure, but a lot of them are like the mega church type of
Trendy,
like cookie
progressive,
cutter.
and hip.
Yeah. Like 30-minute services, 2 songs, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's crazy. So, with LA and stuff, what can you say? Cause I know where you're at too. Like, it's not like, cause you're in Houston, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like every part has their bad part, their ghetto, stuff like that.
Yep.
But what would you say to people like, in LA right now that are like, this is a belly of the beast, like the worst of the worst, Democratic state, the whole deal. Like talk to a little bit about that, about, cause I believe personally, like you shine brightest in the dark. Like us as Christians, like we should be shining right now. Talk about that, because you mentioned something about poop in LA. Like so many people talk to a little bit about that, about Los Angeles, because you've lived here before, right?
Yeah. My wife and I and daughter lived here for a little over a year. But yeah, I was joking because there's maps where to avoid homeless people's poop for LA. They're like, hey, this is where everybody's defecating. Don't go near those spots.
So
and I was
crazy.
like, man, like LA's gotten rough since we left. You know?
It has, though, for sure.
And every time I come here to preach, I get heat every time from every preacher that I know, basically, that's not in California. It's just like, man, how can you go out there? It's so dangerous. And they're not real Christians. Like they're weekend Christians. Like you can't, you know, you'll have a preacher be there and then go do coke in the Hollywood Hills on a porn site, you know?
No, yeah.
And I'm like, well, yeah, that happens, you know, but I say this, like, LA has not been marked by the devil, right? It's had its struggles and its issues. It's been marked by God. And if we're Christians, we need to stop agreeing with hell about LA and California, and we need to agree with heaven about Los Angeles and California. Every time if somebody gave my wife and I a house here, we would move here instantaneously. Like that's how much our heart is for here. We had to leave because we couldn't afford it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Right? That's why we moved back to Houston. And so, but we loved it here. When I was here, our ministry was thriving. We were starting to get into Hollywood, like ministering to the people from Dancing with the Stars and at the W Hotel, like all this kind of stuff with the Lord was opening up all these doors.
Yeah.
And then Ahab hit us in our finances and we couldn't win that
I feel
round.
like Hollywood is your people. Like
big time.
You've shared a lot about people like you've, you know, ministered to, you shared about a party you went to and stuff. I feel like you belong. I'm not trying to get you. It's not a prophetic word, but like,
yeah, you wouldn't have to talk me into it. I want to be here. Yeah.
Yeah. But Hollywood, like this is like I feel like this is like you would shine here.
Oh, big time.
For sure.
And the thing is, I think when people talk about Hollywood being so dark and LA being so dark, yeah, that's present.
Yeah.
But Jesus is talking to Peter, right? And he said, upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it.
Amen.
Where they were was where they worshiped the god Pan. Okay, it's where we get the word pandemic, pandemonium, panic.
Wow.
Right? And it was filled with human sacrifice. And so there was the god Pan, that was a big stone idol there. And there was gates there that they would close and open, right? When you could come and sacrifice. So there's filth, excrement, dead bodies, dead babies, like all this stuff in this place. And Jesus is saying, this is where I'm going to build my church.
That's so good.
It was considered unclean for Jews to even go to this spot. And that's where Jesus took the disciples, was a no-go zone.
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh no, that place is only filth. It's only darkness.
Yeah.
And I think Christians have become really great on agreeing with the devil. And we need to start looking at things again and going, no, like Los Angeles has been chosen by God, the city of angels.
Come on.
Like this place has been chosen by the Lord for a mighty outpouring and has experienced mighty outpouring. You look at the Azusa revival.
Yeah, of course.
William Seymour came from my town, from Houston, Texas.
Oh, yeah.
Kicked out of Houston.
It's crazy.
Because he was black and he couldn't go, like he had to sit outside the school to learn.
It's crazy.
And then he gave a prophetic word that said, in 100 years after my death, revival will return to California. And he also, a lesser known prophecy, people like to get on stage and talk about revival coming to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
He also said in that same prophetic word that it would come back to Houston as a form of forgiveness.
Wow.
Right. And so LA and Houston are tied.
Jeez.
A lot of these people from LA are moving to Dallas and they're missing it.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's Houston, baby. You missed it. But I'm being funny for those of you that are watching that are my friends that moved to Dallas.
That's
but
funny.
LA this is where my gift shines. And this is where I think because I'm not impressed by people. And that's, and I don't Instagram stuff. I'm not going to do a Instagram of when I'm ministering to, all these well-known people, right? I get invited to Hollywood Hills and they sit me in a chair at people's houses that are well-known and their friends come over for a party and they come up and I pray for them and prophesy over them. Like we've prophesied over people that are all over Hollywood in movies and we don't post it on Instagram.
You're not clout chasing.
Right. And I don't need to.
Yeah.
And that, I think it's that heart posture that the Lord's given me access
so good
to LA.
So
we met with film producers from major studios here just from being at a grocery store near LAX. I was in there, I can't remember what it's called, but it was a grocery store over by LAX, kind of a fancy one where they have carpet everywhere.
Oh, okay.
Right. And Just met this guy, started talking to him. Turns out that he's this big movie director. He had done Signs, the movie Signs with Mel Gibson and all these different movies. Yeah. And he was like, I am fascinated by what you're talking about. I was like, oh, okay. And wound up going to his studio and talking to a bunch of his coworkers that work for him, or whatever in the studio.
Wow.
Like, God opened so many doors when we were here. It was heartbreaking when we left. We left because a church stepped up and said, we'll pay all your bills, we'll pay your rent, and just so you're here in the region.
Wow.
We signed a lease, and 4 days after we signed the lease, they said, we made a clerical error.
Oh, no.
We can't pay your bills. And I was like, we just signed a lease to live in, we were living in the La Brea apartments, right?
Wow.
Right across the street from the Grove. So I'd go over to the Grove every day, and I'd just be prophesying over strangers that were all influencers in the industry, not online influencers, but movie influencers, you know? And so then we had to pack everything up, and we had to clear out our savings, because to get out of that lease was $15,000.
What year was this?
This was 2014.
Wow. So you had to clear out your savings just to get out.
Yeah.
To break the lease.
The $15,000 to break the lease, and then to go home, and we had no place to live. So we had to sell we had this really nice 40-foot RV that we traveled in. We had to sell it for pennies on the dollar because we had nothing.
Yeah.
And so
people have no excuse about being church hurt.
Right. Oh yeah.
You've been church hurt how many times?
My whole life.
And they're still going. Like, come on.
That's just part of the deal. People write off church because they get hurt, and it's like, just people hurt people. You just got to.
And there's some real stuff there. Like there's some real stuff for sure.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Well, as we wrap, how can people get in touch with you? How can people connect with you? You're always speaking so many. I'm pretty sure it's so funny. I always laugh when I see your stuff. Sometimes people are like, when are you coming here? When are you going? And you're like, when they invite me.
When they invite me, yes, yeah.
Like they just think you're just like, oh, I'll just go here today. You just pick a map. It's
I
like,
get that a lot.
I need an invitation.
If you're ever in Alaska, I'm not ever in Alaska.
Yeah. That's funny. But where can people connect with you if they want to connect with you? Plug yourself in.
So they could go to my website, which is lukeholter.org. They can find me on Facebook, just Luke Holter. I've got a personal page and a fan page. My personal page has already reached its limit of 5,000, but my fan page, I'm very interactive with. A lot of times people don't want to follow a fan page, right? We have 15,000 on there now, but people get like, well, I can't really connect. I'm on that one more than I'm on my personal. I'll do Facebook Lives every so often with teachings. So Facebook, Instagram, but yeah, my website. That's basically Facebook and my website. That's how people can find me.
Awesome.
If they want to get plugged in with what we're doing.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again, Luke. I appreciate you, man. Thank you so
for
much.
Having me.
So such a blessing, and you don't need to hear this, but you're such a blessing to us. Continue on. Please don't ever quit. You're our favorite prophet ever for sure. So I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, connect with Luke. He's so amazing. I hope you guys can see him in person one day. He's outside of the box, but I mean, just so prophetic, so much insight, so much wisdom. And it's such a blessing. So we'll see you guys in the next episode. Stay tuned for more.